So now we're on to the fun stuff: product regulations and compliance. This is your responsibility, and I cannot stress this enough. You can't turn around at the dock, or when you've had maybe even your product has been imported over to your destination country. You cannot turn around and say, oh, it's the supplier's fault. The supplier made it, they should have known. No, that doesn't work. It's your responsibility. A lot of the time when it comes to regulations and compliance, it's to do with labeling, incorrect labeling, and we're going to be in the next slides, or the next couple of slides, we're going to be talking about the labeling that you need to have on your product and also on your packaging. It's essential. It is essential, and it's got to be done. It's not something that you can ignore or jump over. It's a requirement, and it will save you huge amounts of time. Without it done correctly, there can be repercussions, as you can see, with delays, fines, confiscation, prosecution. I put those in red because I really want you to focus on this and make sure it doesn't happen to you. As long as you take a bit of care and due diligence, it will be fine. But just make sure that you are careful and you do go through the hoops, making sure that everything is fully compliant and that your products conform to the complete requirements and regulations. Okay, so when we are importing to different countries, there are different regulations that have to be taken into account. For example, with the UK and the EU, as part of the UK, well, in the UK you have BSI, which is British Standard, but it also has the EU certification, which is Conformité Européenne, pardon my French, but basically it's a general European standard. Now, a lot of the time, for example, maybe you're using a mouse at the moment. If your mouse comes from Europe and you look at the bottom of it, or if you look maybe on the sides, you will see the CE mark, which shows the regulation, that it shows conformity to that regulation. So yeah, you just got to be aware of the regulations in different countries. The main one that you're going to see is CE. In the USA, there's the CPSA, which is the Consumer Product Safety Act. Also, it is commonly also known as the CPSIA, you might see that too, which is the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. Similar things, different guidelines. These things change all the time, and I'm going to talk to you about this more on the next slide. For Australia and New Zealand, you've got the AS and NZS mandatory regulations sort of stamp, which is actually mandatory and voluntary. They actually break theirs down into different categories depending on your product. There's 30 categories at the moment that you need to be aware of. So again, in our courses we give you the links to show you exactly where those regulations can be found, so you can make sure that you conform to them. But just be aware that they're there, and make sure that your product conforms to the required regulations. So as I mentioned, I said pick up your mouse, but any sort of electronic gadget that you might have that might have come from Europe, you'll probably see this on the bottom of it. It's the CE mark, and this is actually a certification mark for health and safety and environmental standards to show that it conforms to those standards. Now, just to show you how things can change, in 2014 there was a directive from the EU. So basically a directive is something that has to be followed within a certain timescale by all of the countries that are participating in the EU partnership. Came in 2014. It was enforced by 12th of June 2017. So by that time, every product that was being sold had to have that CE mark on it, and it had to conform to the radio equipment directive that was released by the EU back in 2014. So I mean, this particular directive, it aimed to help to improve, counteract against fraud and protect people's data, and also additional sort of technical features so that the product was more compliant and safer for the user. Whether it works or not, remains to be seen, but it's a directive by the EU, and I just wanted to show you this because it is an example of how things can change. And EU directives, they usually, as I said, they take a couple of years. They get brought in, and then there's a couple of years for for all of the member states to conform to the directive. Sometimes, depending on what the directive is, the timescale can be a lot shorter. But again, in our courses, we give you the links to all of the recent directives that are being released by the EU, and it's never usually an immediate thing, and then you've got to immediately change. There is usually some time scale there, so you will have a bit of time to prepare. Just to be aware of it. Compliance regulation tests, extremely important. They're to do with the safety, the labelling, and the warning labels and compliance marks. I cannot stress labelling enough. I talked about it a few slides ago, but labelling is crucially important, especially when you're, for example, your products are about to be shipped, and well, customs are going to check them. They're going to look for the labelling. They're going to look for the safety standards to make sure that the physical and mechanical requirements are met. All of the required documentation needs to be there, the product manuals, the warnings. You've got to give sort of instruction booklets, for example, if it's an electronic product. And whatever product it is, really, there's got to be sort of something in there to say, don't burn this, or don't eat this. It's got to have something on there, some sort of safety guidelines and guidance in some sort of warning material. You'll have seen them whenever you get a product. There's always a little bit of paper in there with some guidelines on it, and that's pretty much what that is. And substance and material restrictions, obviously you've got to be careful of those. Chemicals and metals, you don't want to be using chemicals and metals that aren't allowed in said country, whichever one you're going to be importing to. But the lab testing also, sometimes it's going to be a mandatory, sometimes you might just want to get it done, but if you do, regardless, it's got to be done by an accredited testing company, otherwise it's fairly useless. So regarding the government regulations themselves and the hoops that you need to jump through when you're importing products, these, as mentioned, can frequently change. So you'll need to keep up to date with it. Now, the best source of information is the government websites themselves. All of the information will be on there. The only thing is you can perhaps have to trawl through many, many pages of legal terminology to get to the place where you want to be that gives you the details that you need. Just want you to be aware of that. The lawyer's agency route is probably your safest option. The only thing is, it's going to be your most expensive option. Lawyers will give you peace of mind and legal comeback on the advice that they provide, obviously, but the fees can be extortionate. With an agency, it's probably going to be cheaper, but you might not have legal comeback on the advice that is provided to you. On our platform, what we actually do is position ourselves somewhere in the middle. So we give you the resources that you need. We show you the links and the pages and the articles so that it'll take you straight to where you need to get to, depending on your product or your jurisdiction that you're looking to import to. So we try and save you huge amounts of time by showing you where to go, and we update all of the information as much as we possibly can. Obviously, there's a ton of regulations with different jurisdictions, so sometimes we can take our eye off the ball slightly. Generally, fairly soon afterwards, we will be updating the links, so you'll be able to go to the place that you need to be at, which is going to save you massive amounts of time.